I may be depressed after this. I may be looking like this guy because apparently your job, my job, her job, their job, everyone's job, it's useless, man. What do we gotta do? AI's taking over.
If it was meaningless, you're not alone. Millions of people right now are spending their entire day doing meaningless work. But recently, this paradigm has actually shifted. The 9 to 5 is dying out, and the
This is true.
essential way our society functions has begun to change.
Yep.
Decades ago, stories like
I've been waiting for this my whole life.
American Beauty and Fight Club spoke
I've been ready.
to millions when they showed bureaucratic office jobs as the meaningless prisons they really are. But even the
Exactly.
author of Fight Club didn't know how
I mean, that's what I grew up thinking of, seeing these office jobs as just being trapped and just siphon the soul right out of you.
much worse it was going to get. So let's find out why most 9 to 5 jobs are useless, why they're dying out, and what the grim future of work
American
will really
Pie?
look like in the coming years. You see, lots
The
of people
Naked
think
Mile.
their jobs are meaningless.
Fantastic
In one of
movie.
the more recent surveys on the topic, 33% of people asked think their job makes no meaningful contribution to society.
That has to suck. 33% of people go to work knowing that they do not do anything to make a meaningful contribution to society. That has to hurt your soul. When I worked at Telemundo for a little while and I was helping, sell social media ads or everything, that's no real benefit. That's not a meaningful benefit. Sure, you can go in there and joke to yourself saying that you're helping a small mom and pop business get seen so that they can have the American entrepreneurial life, but it's never that simple. It's way more gross than that.
Some industries
Hey, did I know that Sharma, the lady from the first post-interviewed Macron president, and in the first 20 seconds, she roasted his co-interview from France TV. Nice.
is much worse. For financial services, retail work, or hospitality, it's more like 50%. This won't be news to
It's crazy that in hospitality, I'm in healthcare and hospitality right now, and that's just an insane stat to me.
working in these industries, especially in bureaucratic office jobs. Books and films have been
Well,
exploring
don't worry, Elon's gonna fire them here soon.
this for decades now. The reason Fight Club became so popular was because of how relatable the main character's situation is. At the beginning of the story, we see a man who spends his life drifting through useless meetings and exchanging buzzwords with his boss. He sees his work not just as meaningless, but as an actual detriment to society.
Yeah.
It doesn't fulfill him, and the fruits of his labor have
There's nothing worse for guys, and I know most of the people who are watching this are men, right? There's nothing worse for us, and hopefully you guys can resonate this because I feel this way. That my value, and this is not a good thing. I'm not saying that you should do this. If you don't, I'm jealous because this is how my brain works. Men most often time attach their value to how much progress they're making, how productive they are, how much they can contribute not just to their family but to the society and get the acknowledgement from society. So when we're constantly working and we're busting our balls, we're working a 70 or a 90-hour work week like they want us to work out in India, and you go home and you don't feel like you're worried and you're stressed out, like you're barely making it end to end, and you're giving it all of this work and you're barely paying the bills. You're not really getting the attention that you want from your family. You're not getting the support that you need from your significant other. So the only thing you could do is just have faith in your work, but then you know that your work is ultimately frivolous and has no major contribution to society. Like, so many men live quiet lives of desperation, and so many beautiful ideas go to the grave that never get to be shown the light of day.
haven't given him
It's so sad. I hate seeing it.
a real life. His fridge is full of condiments rather than real food. But we're still only seeing half of the full picture. Surveys tell us how people really feel about their own jobs, but it doesn't tell us about the jobs themselves. The fact that retail and hospitality workers are at the top of the list is telling. Their work was declared to be essential when lockdown hit. Society couldn't function without them.
How fucked up was it? At least over here in the States, people got fired for having a non-vital job or non-important job or something along those lines. The language around it was so gross.
It's clear that this kind of work is needed, but it doesn't feel that way to people doing it. It implies that how society treats the people working these jobs is what makes them disillusioned. The fact that their work is actually essential doesn't factor in. But for
That's right. It was essential workers and non-essential workers. And like me being a personal trainer or service guy, that's super, super essential for society to help people get strong, fit, move better about certain things. As a personal trainers almost act as like physical therapy or like a therapist as well.
Other sectors like financial services, we're not talking about essential work. As we'll find out, their feelings aren't based on how society doesn't reward their work. Instead, they're based on the fact that their work is meaningless to society itself. And it leads us to a crossroads. Work can be meaningless in two different ways.
We learned this if you watch Jujutsu Kaisen. This is Naname! This was his inner conflict that he had to deal with.
Feel meaningless to the person doing the job, or it can be objectively meaningless to society itself. While the survey tells us a lot about the first way, it doesn't tell us anything about the second. Society is still only beginning to confront this. The idea that a large proportion of the workforce accomplishes nothing of value and contributes nothing to society. Many have suspected this to be the case for years.
If we continue in the way we've run our economy for the last 40 years,
we're going to run into the ground.
It will be disastrous.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the future of work, we're kind of talking about the future of the whole system.
That's right. I mean, you cannot have a...
The system's got to merge with AI and technology, and we got to almost merge with that and become cyborgs if we're going to keep up.
prosperous economy without prosperous workers.
But no attempt was made to fully explore it until David Graeber released a book on the subject in 2018. Based on an earlier viral essay, he makes the case that a massive proportion of jobs, only half by his estimation, are actually meaningless in that they contribute nothing to society. According to him, there's a simple test to see
I might read that book.
If you have one of those jobs. If you stop showing up to work tomorrow, would the world care? Would any part of it be impacted in any way, outside of your similarly useless colleagues noticing your absence? David then further breaks these kinds of jobs down into 5 different categories. First, you've got the flunkies. Their only job is to make other jobs seem more important. Tasks that could be automated by machines invented decades ago are kept around because it looks or feels better if a human does it. Like a doorman or receptionist whose only job is to tell people when other people have arrived at the office. The next are the goons. According to David, their only real purpose is to engage in costly battles with other goons hired by other companies.
This is like the lawyers.
The legal world is full of them. Some lawyers only have one job: to waste the time and money of their competitors by filing frivolous, meaningless lawsuits.
How miserable is that existence?
Ideally, for any CEO employing them, they'll waste more of your competitors' money than your own. Disney is especially notorious for their armies of legal goons, who busy themselves suing nurseries that put a picture of Mickey Mouse on the wall. We're almost halfway.
So is Animation or Funimation, the anime company, because whenever I try to upload a YouTube shit, they're sending one of their goons after my ass.
Right now. The third category are the duct tapers, who fix problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. Lots of people have had a job like this, where their whole workday could be eliminated if something was fixed somewhere else in the company. Some service jobs fall into this category. Imagine you're the CEO of a company that's been making defective umbrellas. People have been complaining a lot, and you could fix the production issue, or you could just hire more people to man the customer service hotline. Box tickers are the next category.
Fix the issue!
People whose job it is to confirm the fact that other people are doing their job. They'll create whole systems whose only purpose is to log what other workers are doing, proving things which were already clear to everyone. And lastly, you've got the taskmasters, who assign meaningless work to other people. These are the managers who oversee other jobs, but only
this is the managerial and leadership role in corporate that frustrates me the most.
Create problems rather than solving them. They might do this by making people fill out assessment forms and compliance paperwork for no real reason, artificially extending the time it takes for other people to do their jobs. All of this is the basic makeup of the 9-to-5 job. This isn't to say all office jobs are like this. There's nearly always some useful people, but as companies get larger, they become rarer and rarer, while these useless parasitic roles become far more common. We've at least known that as organizations get larger, they become less efficient. It's called Price's Law, and the theory is that the square root of the total population of employees is half the work. In smaller organizations, this isn't as noticeable. In a company of 10 people, for example, 3 people are generally doing half of the work, but as a company gets larger, it only gets more lopsided. In a company of 100 people, 10 are doing half of the work. In a company of 1,000 people, only 30 are doing half of the work. Wow. This wouldn't be possible in modern companies without the kinds of meaningless jobs that David describes. This grossly inefficient system is what's defined the 9-to-5 for decades.
And what a lot of people are not going to realize with this is why it's so much shit is so expensive in America. It's not because the actual cost of the product has gone up, but you're having to actually pay for all the different salaries that have in the hands that have touched that product or even talked about or made a note about that product along the way.
And it's one of the root causes of why people working these kinds of jobs feel so aimless in life. But we've got to go even deeper to uncover the true reason why these kinds of jobs even exist in the first place.
It's also super dumb. I think it's gross that there's corporations that give you a certain amount of sick days. Hey, you can only be sick 7 days this year. If you're sick more than that, we're going to have to write you up.
And as we get there, you'll see why this world of useless bureaucracy is destined to shrink into nothing over the next few decades. And that's going to bring with it a bunch of problems, which we'll see later in the video. A lot of people tend to reach out to me to learn how to express or communicate their ideas in the form of full-length videos like I do.
I'd say Moon does a very good job. Moon does a good job on this.
Way possible, irrespective of whatever skill level you're at. And InVideo AI enables you to do just that. You simply start by typing in a prompt or going through one of the workflows based on the video. All of these useless jobs are because the system has gone wrong. By analyzing a few key contradictions that sprung up over the past few decades, we get closer to the truth. Take productivity. It's a pretty simple economic principle. Just take the economic output of a country, often expressed as the GDP, and compare it to the total amount of hours people worked. Over the past 70 years, productivity in the US has gone up by over 250%, all thanks to technological progression and other factors. Yeah. Meanwhile, wages have actually stagnated. It's almost like people are only being paid for 15 hours of the 40-hour work weeks they're putting in.
That's actually kind of insane. And then once we get our money, if you live in California, half of your paycheck is gone.
Decades ago, when people saw how fast productivity was rising, they logically thought it would mean that people wouldn't have to work long hours. Economists like Maynard Keynes, writing all the way back in the 1930s, predicted we'd be down to 15 hours by now.
Well, that's the efficient thing. Like, we can go in, like for me, I can get a 9-hour day done in 3 to 4 hours. So why should I work the other 4 to 5 hours just twiddling my thumb and just technically burning corporate money, inflate the prices, and just lower the hours worked? Eventually it's probably net the same, but you're gonna get a way more efficient system in my eyes.
Obviously that's really not how it panned out. Instead, hours have either remained stable or actually increased in lots of cases. For example, over half of UK workers regularly exceed their contracted hours, with 3.8 million doing unpaid overtime, which averages out to about 7.2 hours each week. European workers are finding themselves handling more unpaid work than they have for decades, while in America more than 400,000 people work 2 full-time jobs, or an incredible 13 million when you include part-time work as well. Anecdotally, lots of people feel that Keynes was actually right about their jobs, as often people in office jobs will say they only do about 15 hours of real work every week. The rest is made up of useless emails mixed with endless meetings, paperwork, and conference calls. It means that it could be the case that there aren't many truly meaningless jobs, just lots of mostly meaningless jobs with a small amount of real work mixed in. This would make meaningless jobs a good way to explain the productivity paradox. However well it all seems to fit together though, there's still the question of how all of this useless work could even exist. But the answer to this question exposes the entire system and how we get there by changing how we think about work. So far, we've been talking in purely economical terms, but the modern 9-to-5 and the modern world of work clearly doesn't make sense economically. But it does make sense politically though. Before the rise of meaningless jobs and meaningless work, there was a pretty clear deal between companies and their employees. The company would offer stable, meaningful work in exchange for a good salary. The employee got enough to build their own life, start their own family, and their work usually gave them a place in the community as well.
And ideally, that sense of work gave them a sense of accomplishment.
Meanwhile, the company got a loyal, hard-working employee. In the wake of the Second World War and massive political instability, it was a necessary deal for them to make with the people. As the 20th century went on though, this deal between employees and companies fell apart. Fast forward to the 90s and Fight Club gives us a pretty good picture of how it had changed. Meaningless jobs had fully come in, and now there was no social contract anymore. Before, when jobs still had meaning, they required specialized skills that took years to learn. With meaningless office jobs, one drone is the same as another, so companies no longer had any incentive to stay loyal when it came to most of their jobs.
And that's ultimately, it's not even the employees that became loyal to the company or disloyal to the companies. It's the companies became disloyal to their employees. As soon as they could find somebody to replace you for cheaper, they're going to. It doesn't matter how productive, how long you've been with the company, any of it. We've seen people who have stayed with the company for 22 years and the company just sends them a birthday card with a generic written letter and maybe like a $10 Starbucks card. Unacceptable.
Lots of people no longer made enough money to build a family or create meaning outside of their career, and the higher paying jobs that could support a family were often those meaningless middle class jobs. The hours for these kinds of jobs also went up over time, while community slowly dies out in society. People were left with no meaning in their work and no meaning outside of their work either, other than blind consumerism. And that's the trap that millions of men fell into, and the trap.
I'm not gonna lie. If I didn't have this YouTube channel and me working out and like and I say the YouTube and Twitch channel, that way I can communicate with you guys and have like people to talk to and bounce my ideas off of, and sometimes be told that I'm wrong and like change my perspective, I would be in a much worse place. I already was. I've already been through like this depressed funk of like feeling like a rat in a rat race, and I felt like I have been blessed, and I'm so blessed to have escaped, and I am grateful to have escaped that trap
that the main character finds himself at the beginning of Fight Club. At this point in time, the only thing that the 9-to-5 still really offered was a stable income. There was still a sense of safety for people working these kinds of jobs. Even if it was a mental prison, at least they fed you every day. But today, you can't even be sure of the stability anymore. This was the last thing that kept the 9-to-5 going, but it's on its way out. The only thing left that's even recognizable about work today is that it keeps people busy, and that's the only thing most jobs have to accomplish now. This is the true reason why most likely your job is completely pointless. Artificial, meaningless work only exists to keep people occupied and focused on their own survival. While the old system worked fine, it's far more profitable to run the world this way instead. Gradually,
It's so gross. It is far more profitable to run this way. And currently, like in hospice, that's what I work in. It's so gross that these corporations want to make sure that they keep these fake margins of like, hey, we need to make sure that we're grossing 20% margins year after year. And if we had a PR, we made more money than we ever had last year, we're gonna make sure that we do it again next year.
over the course of decades, CEOs turned up the pressure a little more on their employees. Prices went up ever so slightly more each month, while wages remained static. The hours still needed to be worked, even though there wasn't enough to do, so meaningless work and meaningless jobs came into the picture. As the turmoil of the 20th century was forgotten, it became accepted that people didn't need real incentives to keep showing up to work. The carrot wasn't necessary anymore, only the stick. If you don't work, then you'll eventually starve, so you've got no choice.
That's true.
And if you don't have any...
And if what's issue is if you don't work, you may not be able to pay your bills. But now if you have one job, you may only be able to pay your bills. You're not going to be able to afford a family. You're not going to be able to afford the lifestyle that you want. You're not going to be able to afford to save and invest and grow your assets and grow your net worth to maybe be able to provide for your family. Not unless you're working 2, maybe 3 jobs.
money, people won't respect you if you don't have the right products. Now, there was never really a global conspiracy for this to happen. It just makes sense as a collection of millions of individual decisions. Companies saw their competitors squeeze their employees harder and get away with it, so they did the same. Today, the 9-to-5 job is a relic of a bygone time when that amount of work was needed, and it still brought stability and meaning to people's
I would really
lives.
like not to be
Meaningless
proved
jobs
wrong.
became the norm. But it wasn't until the 2008 crisis that the next phase began in work. The 2008 crisis represented the height of greed and negligence on the part of those in power. Meanwhile, millions who still believed in the old system and the old social contract overplayed what little they had left and bought into predatory housing loans in an attempt to achieve the American dream. When the bubble burst, it left regular people poorer than ever, vulnerable to exploitation.
2008 was a tumultuous year for the economy. The housing market collapse created one financial crisis after another.
Man, I saw this hurt my parents. I saw it hurt their hearts.
And it often...
They did such a good job when I was a kid of not letting me see the finances affect them, but as a kid, you could pick up on those things. And as I've gotten older, I could put the context into it. Like, dang, my parents bent over backwards. Like, shout out to you, Mom. Shout out to you, Pops. Mom, I know you watch this shit, so if you see it, love you.
It seemed as if the news could only get worse.
The world still hasn't recovered from this. Things like zero-hour contracts became common, deals which offered no stability whatsoever to employees, and at the same time, new technology opened the door to a new kind of working system. Although, as we'll find out, it's horrifyingly similar to what you'd find in the least advanced places in the
Hey,
world.
Tata!
It's the new gig economy, and it represents the final nail in the coffin for the 9-to-5 job.
It's not the final nail to the 9-to-5 job. This is what people do before the 9 or after the 5. These gig economy jobs, whether it be DoorDash, Uber Eats, in this case, I would like to say streaming, content creation, influencer, stuff around those lines.
First, we went from needing 1 adult working per family to 2.
Yep.
Now, that isn't even enough. as we've seen from the 13 million
It's exactly what I was saying.
people working the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs. For people in low-paying jobs, the 9-to-5 died a long time ago. It's all got a simple explanation. Wages have stagnated while the cost of living has risen. People just can't get by without picking up extra work, creating a population of people desperate for anything to see them through the month.
What's sad is if I look at from when I was 18 and working a job to where I'm at now with the job that I have, I am making, I'll just tell you, I'm making close to 6 figures. And if I can have a couple months by the end of next year with bonuses and incentives, I may be able to hit 6 figures USD. But it feels the exact same as when I was 18 making the same amount of money. So just within 12 years, it feels like my, part-time job working at a gym gave me the same amount of disposable income, a roof over my head, paying for my phone bill, paying for the car outside, all of that. It's insane. Geeky, I liked what you said here. You said, meanwhile, government employees are laughing at the rest of us and got their paychecks and bribes and do the fraud and become rich while not doing their job or not even going to their offices for 9 to 5. Fire all government employees. I think Elon is on that shit for real.
Fast download speeds from cellular networks, combined with features of mobile phones.
It's so America is the #1 global superpower, but man, over the past, it feels like more than 20 years. It almost feels like 30, 40 years. It has slowly just been taken advantage of and kind of doing it itself, of propping up and getting its nose into areas it shouldn't, and sending off money, bringing money in, but not really for the people, but for the politicians. Like, it's just super gross.
It's also enabled the
And I hope Elon does not prove me wrong and winds up being the Antichrist. I hope not. I hope he's pro-human like he says he is. And up until now, I mean, for this whole Trump, Elon, Tulsi, RFK, Kash Patel, JD, all the Tom Holland, like all promises made, promises kept so far.
development of a
Fingers
new kind
crossed.
of company. Uber is the classic example because they got there first.
Yeah.
Traditional taxi companies have a lot of different responsibilities to their drivers. They often provide the vehicles they're licensed with the government to do business, and sometimes all the taxi driver has to do is just drive the taxi. The company then takes the rest of the responsibility.
You're more optimistic?
Uber created a different kind of system.
No, I think that's what I'm saying. Promises made, promises kept. I hope I didn't say that wrong. I don't think Elon Musk is the Antichrist. I'm saying I hope that he proved me right that he is not the Antichrist.
Where all they
Is the left? If you're a Democrat, you think he's a Nazi, devil, creature spawn thing.
really do is connect customers with drivers.
He's an alien.
They don't provide the vehicles, the training, or
I just
really
think he's
anything
somewhere on the
other than a
spectrum.
way for people to monetize driving. They're just the middleman siphoning money out of an economic system that already existed, while transforming it in the process. This
Yeah.
model eliminates meaningless work, because it does away with paying people for their time to begin with. Even zero-hour contracts pay people for the time they expend. Uber and other companies like it only pay for the actual work people do. As such, it's an incredibly profitable system for the people who operate it once
Yeah, Etsy's on here too. Fiverr, I'm really familiar with. Like when I worked at Telemundo, I had a whole bunch of people that I was hiring for contracts for Fiverr, and I'm like, man, this is so dumb because I could do this.
they get large
He does some drugs, right? I mean, coffee is a drug, Tylenol is a drug. I think he drinks coffee, so that's technically a drug. But I don't think he like smokes weed on the regular, if that's what you're getting at, Deep.
enough to take control of the market. Industries like driving or food delivery have already been taken over. Soon it could spread to everything else as well as the technology improves and these kinds of platforms can manage different kinds of work. The scale of this change is staggering. The gig economy is now set to grow from over $500 billion to over $1.8 trillion by 2032, encompassing everything from just delivery drivers to high-end consultants, making up 12% of the total labor worldwide. These companies will frame this as a new way forward. They will imply that it gives people more independence, like they've taken control of their own work, and that's
I mean, it does give the people more independence because then they could say, hey, we're going to work during these hours, but unless you're a sugar mama or unless you're like a sugar daddy and you're just your sugar mom or your little side piece is just doing this for fun, like no one's supplementing their 9 to 5 for this unless they're working a whole bunch of different things. No, apparently he does ketamine. Actually, I've heard that.
As such, they can enjoy
Do you know we have 5 fucking million government employees, and I bet you more 60% of them, 80% of them probably ain't doing shit.
the fruits of their labor. In reality, though, it represents a far more sinister.
Like, what would you rather have, an army of 1,000 generic men, or would you rather have 300 Spartans? I think history has taught us the correct answer.
Slide backwards. All you need to do to see this is to look at the more exploitative economies with even less protection for people than ours. The gig economy has also been used to great effect by new companies like Shein, for example. The $66 billion company has made its money through the gig economy model for its clothes manufacturers. Workers aren't paid a salary. Instead, they're paid per product they can make, in the same way as Uber drivers are paid per trip they make. While there might be legal limits on hours they can work, they're often ignored. People work 7-day weeks from the early morning well into the night. Talk to Uber drivers and you'll find this is often true for them as well. The company obviously doesn't mind and the workers don't have a choice. It's either this or even worse poverty and starvation for their families. While it isn't this extreme in the West yet, the rise of the gig economy and the death of the 9-to-5 shows that it's just around the corner. It's inevitable because in the short term, it's far more profitable for companies to operate this way. As high up Silicon Valley investors.
But it's so gross. Can't you take 10%, 20% less of a salary and make sure the employees get paid better and more fairly?
Investors like Naval Ravikant have predicted, the world's economy is going more individualistic.
It's becoming much easier to communicate with people. Gig economy, I can send you small amounts of money, I can hire you through an app, I can rate you afterwards. So,
but how are you getting your money?
We're seeing an atomization of the firm. We're seeing the optimal size of the firm shrinking. It's most obvious in Silicon Valley. Tons and tons of startups constantly coming up and shaving off little pieces of businesses from large companies and turning them into huge markets.
And the effects
what is
of
a
this
gig
on
economy?
People...
It's not giga. To get rid of the A, it's just gig. Gig economy. This is like for your, I don't know if you guys have like Uber Eats, Uber, Lyft. Shein apparently does this with creating clothes. Like a gig economy is just like, hey, I'm gonna pay you to do this gig for me. It's not like an official 9-to-5. It is technically a 1099 self-employed job.
Could be disastrous. All those benefits people used to get from the social contract are gone in the gig economy.
You have Uber,
You're not even
Zomato,
an employee
Swiggy,
anymore,
Geeky,
so
all
no
of those are going
benefits
to
or
be
even
gig
paid time
economy.
off. There's also no
You had
stability
Uber Eats
either.
before
If
us?
you can't work tomorrow
Shit.
because of an injury, then you're on your own completely. The pay for this kind of work is low as well.
DoorDash is my thing. I don't use Uber Eats.
Because the people doing the work have no power or leverage in the system to change it. It means that there's no way to build a family or meaning outside of work if you're constantly having to put in hours.
Yeah.
Especially if you're being paid below minimum wage for your work.
Absolutely.
It means that people in this position no longer have any real stake in
No,
the system.
not Uber Eats, but similar-
It creates
yeah,
apathy,
similar things.
resentment and anger, the same things we're seeing all over culture today. All while the elites make even more money, creating even more inequality, frantically driving a need for more materialism and status symbols in society
to me, this is bringing me back to like the warlord days of humankind, where you have a few people who have a lot of money, who have a lot of the resource, and can hire you to do just a weird specific job of just taking the pig out to the river and let it get some water and coming back, and he's just going to pay you a small amount of coin, basically nothing for that. That's what this gig economy makes me feel like. It's just a more industrialized, technological version of warlords who can just control the resources and just sparingly get that out. That way they don't have to have a consistent salary coming out for an employee that isn't going to always make up what that salary is worth. Over long runs of years, for sure. But there's going to be times, weeks and months where you're definitely overpaying the employee for the productivity that it's put in.
separate yourself from the
Not just physical work, but it could be painting, it could be IT work, it could be like maybe doing some electrical for the house. Like it could be a lot of different things. Writing a program.
masses. The only good news, if you can call it that, is that the system will end up being completely unsustainable. Those in power have been delaying this collapse for years, but that can only work for so long. The further it goes, the more people realize that there is no way out and no way to build a life in a system like this. Eventually, young people with nothing to gain by playing the game will just flip the table. Well,
they try to flip the table by starting up their own, entrepreneurial stuff, whether they be a content creator, whether they open up their own gym. But then they realize they traded in a 9-to-5 that has a quote-unquote stable life for working for themselves for 24/7. And now if there's an issue, if there's a problem that comes up, you're technically the boss now. So you have to put out all the fires.
might change things, it's not really a good result either. Without the lie of the system, what's left except for anarchy? While it might be cathartic to see it all coming tumbling down, it's rarely gone well afterwards historically. Pretty soon people are going to be missing the days when the meaninglessness of your job was the only thing you ever had to worry about. At least the main character from Fight Club had enough to own his own apartment and his own collection of meaningless IKEA furniture. The alternative we're seeing today with the death of the 9 to 5 is just as meaningless when it doesn't give you anything in return at all.
So we're going on with this government, like we're talking about the railroad system here, and I'm saying that 1.4 million employees just to build the railroads. I mean, what the hell? But then we got Geeky saying, or should be saying, the Indian railroads are very big, but their net profit is 2%. The government has to invest tens of times more to upgrade the railway infrastructure. I wonder, learning from what's going on in America and these American contracts of like if the American government goes to a company and they're going to pay for a railroad or something along those lines, it seemingly they just hand the company a blank check and say, how much is it going to be worth? And the company is like $100 million. And the government's like, oh, that's it? Okay, let me sign the back of that. And they're like, shit, we should have said $200 million. So when the contract comes up and they're like, hey, we didn't get all the progress done, we're actually going to need $250 million. They're like, oh, that's what you should have said the first time. And the only thing that increased was the budget, but the end product stays the same. And the increase in the budget just goes to funneling the money into the bureaucrats. It's actually insane. No competition. You say that. That's what we were told too, Yash. That's what we were told. That's what we were told up until this administration came out and is just laying out the receipts, the cold, hard facts.